Amara Collins checked her watch as she pushed open the heavy glass door of Metropolitan Trust Bank. It was 10:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the bank was busy, but not crowded. She had just finished a meeting with a client across the street and decided this was the perfect time to fix the problem with her business account. She walked across the polished floor, her heels clicking softly. Amara was 28 years old and ran her own marketing consulting business. She always dressed professionally, and today she wore a navy blue suit with a white blouse. Her briefcase hung from her shoulder as she approached the row of teller windows. There were 4 tellers working that morning. Amara chose the window on the far right because the line there was shortest. Only one person stood ahead of her. The teller at that window was a woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read, Sharon Winters. Amara waited patiently as Sharon helped the customer in front of her. When it was finally her turn, Amara stepped up to the counter with a polite smile. Sharon was looking down at her computer screen, typing something. She did not look up right away. Amara waited for a moment, then cleared her throat gently. "Good morning," Amara said in a friendly voice. "I need some help with my business account, please." Sharon glanced up for just a second, then looked back at her screen. Her face showed no expression. "What's the problem?" she asked flatly, still not making eye contact. Amara kept her smile, though she felt a small flutter of discomfort. "Well, I made a transfer last week from my personal account to my business account. The amount was $3,000, but when I checked my business account yesterday, the money wasn't there. I can see it left my personal account, but it never arrived in the business account." Sharon sighed quietly, as if Amara was bothering her. She finally looked at Amara, but her eyes seemed annoyed. "Account number?" she said. Amara pulled out her phone and read off her business account number carefully. Sharon typed it into her computer with slow, deliberate keystrokes. She stared at the screen for a moment, then shook her head. "Everything looks fine to me," Sharon said, waving her hand dismissively. "The computer shows your account balance is correct. You probably just need to check your own records. Sometimes people forget what they spent." Amara felt her stomach tighten. She knew her records were correct. She checked her accounts every single day. "I'm very careful with my bookkeeping," she explained politely. "I have the confirmation number from the transfer. The $3,000 definitely left my personal account, but it's not showing in my business account. Could you please check the transfer history?" Sharon rolled her eyes, actually rolled them right in front of Amara. "Ma'am, I already told you. The computer says everything is fine. If you're missing money, you need to figure out where you spent it. We don't make mistakes like that here." Amara took a deep breath. She had dealt with difficult customer service before, but this felt different. This felt personal, though she could not quite say why. She decided to stay calm and professional. "I understand you're busy," Amara said, keeping her voice steady. "But this is $3,000 we're talking about. That's a lot of money for my small business. Could I please speak with your manager? Maybe they can look into the transfer records more carefully." Sharon's face changed. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked at Amara like she was being unreasonable. "The manager is busy with actual banking emergencies right now," Sharon said, emphasizing the word actual in a way that made it clear she did not think Amara's problem was important. "Like I said, you probably just need to check your own records better." Amara felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she refused to let her frustration show. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in situations like this often made things worse. "I'll wait for the manager," she said quietly but firmly. "I don't mind waiting. This is important." Sharon shrugged and turned back to her computer. "Fine, have a seat over there," she said, pointing vaguely toward the lobby without looking at Amara. "But I'm telling you, you're wasting your time." Amara walked to the lobby and sat down in one of the cushioned chairs near the window. She set her briefcase beside her and tried to calm the anger bubbling inside her chest. She was a business owner. She paid her taxes. She kept perfect records, and she was being treated like she did not know how to manage her own money. From where she sat, she could still see Sharon's window. She watched as the next customer approached. It was an older white woman with gray hair carrying a large purse. Amara could not hear what the woman said, but she saw Sharon's face immediately brighten into a warm smile. Sharon nodded enthusiastically as the woman spoke, laughing at something she said. Amara looked down at her hands. Maybe she was reading too much into this. Maybe Sharon was just having a bad day. Maybe she had been rude to everyone this morning, not just to her. But as Amara sat there for 5 minutes, then 10, then 15, she began to notice a pattern. She watched Sharon help customer after customer. With each one, Sharon was friendly and attentive. She smiled. She made small talk. She took her time to answer questions. Every single one of those customers was white. 20 minutes passed. Amara checked her phone, then looked up again. A young white man approached Sharon's window now. He looked frustrated, speaking quickly and gesturing with his hands. Amara could not hear exactly what he was saying, but she caught a few words. Missing, and deposit, and where's my money? Sharon's response was immediate and completely different from how she had treated Amara. Sharon leaned forward, her face full of concern. "Oh no, I'm so sorry to hear that," Sharon said loudly enough that Amara could hear from across the lobby. "Let me get my manager right away. We'll fix this for you immediately." Sharon picked up her phone and made a quick call. Within 2 minutes, a man in a dark suit emerged from an office in the back. He was Asian, probably in his 40s, with glasses and a serious expression. His name tag identified him as Robert Chen, branch manager. Amara watched as Robert spoke with the young man, nodding sympathetically, typing things into Sharon's computer, making notes. The whole interaction took maybe 10 minutes, and then the young man left, looking satisfied. Amara stood up. She had waited long enough. She walked back to Sharon's window, but there was now another customer there. She waited to the side until that customer finished, then stepped forward again. "Excuse me," Amara said. "I've been waiting for 20 minutes to speak with the manager about my missing $3,000. Sharon looked at her blankly, as if she had forgotten Amara completely. "Oh, right. He's busy right now. I just watched him help that man who came after me," Amara said, struggling to keep her voice level. Sharon's face hardened. That was a different situation. "Look, I already told you your account is fine. If you keep insisting there's a problem, maybe you should bank somewhere else." Amara felt like she had been slapped. For a moment, she could not speak. Then she saw Robert Chen walking back toward his office. She made a quick decision. "Excuse me, Mr. Chen," Amara called out, walking toward him. "Could I speak with you for a moment, please?" Robert stopped and turned. Before he could respond, Sharon's voice cut through the air. "Sir, this customer is confused about how banking works. I already explained everything to her." Robert glanced at Sharon, then at Amara. He looked tired and impatient. "Ma'am, if my teller already assisted you, I'm sure everything is in order. We're very busy today. If you have further questions, you can call our customer service line." He gave her a tight smile that did not reach his eyes, then turned and walked into his office, closing the door behind him. Amara stood there in the middle of the bank, feeling invisible. She slowly walked back to her seat in the lobby. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she realized it was not just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something that hurt more than she wanted to admit. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app. She began typing everything that had happened, every detail she could remember. The time she arrived. Sharon's name. Robert Chen's name. The way she was dismissed. The way other customers were treated differently. She even took a few discreet photos of the bank interior, making sure to capture the nameplates and the layout. Amara did not know exactly what she was going to do with this information yet, but she knew one thing for certain: this was not over. Not by a long shot. Amara sat in the lobby chair, still typing notes on her phone. Her jaw was tight with frustration, but she forced herself to breathe slowly and stay calm. She had not gotten her problem solved, but she was not ready to leave yet. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, deeply wrong, and she wanted to understand exactly what was happening. She looked around the bank lobby. It was getting busier now, closer to lunchtime. More customers were coming in through the glass doors. The other 3 tellers were all helping people at their windows. Sharon was still at her station on the far right. Amara decided to stay a while longer and simply observe. She pretended to be busy on her phone, but she was actually watching everything happening around her. She watched how the tellers greeted customers. She watched how long each customer spent at the window. She watched the body language, the smiles, the tone of voices when they were loud enough to hear. After about 10 more minutes, a middle-aged black man approached one of the middle teller windows. The teller, a young white man with red hair, helped him quickly but with a neutral expression. No smile, no small talk, just basic service. The transaction took maybe 3 minutes. Amara made a note of it. Then an elderly white couple approached Sharon's window. Amara watched carefully. Sharon's whole face lit up like a lamp being switched on. She greeted them warmly, asking how their day was going. The couple said something about their grandson, and Sharon laughed and asked more questions. They chatted for several minutes while Sharon processed their transaction. When they left, Sharon was still smiling and waving. Amara felt that tight knot in her stomach again. She was seeing it now, clear as day. It was not just her imagination. It was not just a bad day. There was a pattern here. A young Latina woman with a small child approached another window. The teller helped her, but seemed impatient when the woman asked a question in accented English. The teller spoke slowly and loudly, as if the woman was hard of hearing or simple-minded. Amara winced watching it. Then something happened that made everything crystal clear. A middle-aged white man in a business suit entered the bank. He looked agitated, his face red and his movements quick and jerky. He did not wait in any line. He walked straight to Sharon's window even though she had another customer there. The customer, a young white woman, actually stepped aside to let him speak. "I need help right now," the man said loudly, his voice carrying across the whole lobby. "I made a deposit 3 days ago and the money is not showing up in my account. This is completely unacceptable. I have bills to pay." Amara's breath caught in her throat. This was almost exactly the same problem she had come in with. Missing money from a transaction. She leaned forward in her chair, watching intently. Sharon's reaction was instantaneous and dramatic. Her eyes went wide with concern. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry you're experiencing this," Sharon said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "That must be so stressful for you. Let me get our manager right away. We'll figure this out immediately." Amara watched, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. Sharon did not even ask for his account number first. She did not tell him to check his own records. She did not suggest he made a mistake. She just picked up the phone and called the manager right away. Within less than 1 minute, Robert Chen emerged from his office again. He walked quickly to Sharon's window, looking concerned and professional. "What seems to be the problem, sir?" he asked the man. The man explained his situation, his voice loud and angry. Robert nodded seriously, apologizing multiple times. "I completely understand your frustration, sir. Let's get this resolved right away. Sharon, pull up his account history. Let's trace this deposit and see exactly where it went." Amara could not believe what she was witnessing. This was exactly what she had asked for. Exactly. But when she asked, she was dismissed, ignored, told she was confused. This man asked and received immediate attention from both the teller and the manager. Robert and Sharon worked together on the computer for several minutes. They found the problem. Something about the deposit being coded incorrectly. Robert personally made the adjustment to the man's account, credited him the missing amount, and even waived a service fee as an apology for the inconvenience. "Thank you so much," the man said, his anger fading into satisfaction. "I appreciate you taking care of this so quickly." "Of course, sir," Robert said with a smile. "That's what we're here for. If you have any other issues, please don't hesitate to ask for me personally." They shook hands and the man left looking pleased. Robert nodded at Sharon with approval, then walked back to his office. Amara sat frozen in her chair. The evidence was right there in front of her. The exact same type of problem, treated in completely opposite ways. Her hands clenched into fists on her lap. She felt anger, yes, but also something else. Hurt. Disappointment. A crushing sense of being invisible simply because of the color of her skin. She took a deep breath and stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but she walked across the lobby with her head held high. She went straight to Robert Chen's office and knocked on the open door. Robert looked up from his desk, his face showing mild annoyance at being interrupted. "Yes? Mr. Chen, I need to speak with you about a serious problem," Amara said, keeping her voice professional and steady. "I came in here 45 minutes ago with the exact same issue as that gentleman you just helped. $3,000 missing from a transfer. Your teller Sharon refused to help me, refused to look into it, and suggested I didn't know how to manage my own money. But I just watched you help that man with the identical problem in less than 5 minutes." Robert's expression did not change much. He looked uncomfortable but not particularly concerned. "Ma'am, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Amara said firmly. "I've been sitting in this lobby for almost an hour now, watching how customers are treated. I've seen a clear pattern of different treatment based on race. This is discrimination and it's illegal. Before Robert could respond, Sharon appeared at the door. She must have seen Amara heading to the office. "Sir, like I told you before, this customer is confused," Sharon said, her voice taking on a concerned, almost condescending tone. "She thinks there's money missing, but her account is fine. I already checked. She's just not keeping good records." "That's a lie," Amara said, turning to face Sharon directly. "You barely looked at my account. You spent maybe 30 seconds on it before dismissing me, but you spent 10 minutes helping that man with the same issue." Sharon's face flushed red. "I don't appreciate being called a liar. I was doing my job. If you don't like the service here, you can bank somewhere else." Her voice had an edge to it now, a sharpness that had not been there with any other customer. Robert stood up from his desk, holding up his hands. "Ladies, let's all calm down. This is getting out of hand." He looked at Amara with an expression that was trying to be kind but came across as patronizing. "Ma'am, I'm sure this is frustrating for you, but making accusations is not helpful. I'll personally look into your account issue. Give me your account number and I'll call you tomorrow with an update." "I've already waited an hour," Amara said. "That man waited 1 minute. Why can't you look into my account right now the same way you did for him?" Robert's jaw tightened. He clearly did not like being challenged. "That was a different situation. That customer had a time-sensitive payment. I'm happy to help you, but I need time to investigate properly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. Please leave your contact information with Sharon." Amara could not believe what she was hearing. He was actually telling her to leave her information with the same teller who had just treated her so dismissively. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh, but there was nothing funny about this situation. "I'm not leaving my information with Sharon," Amara said coldly. "I'll give it to you directly." She pulled out one of her business cards from her briefcase and placed it on his desk. "That has my phone number and email. I expect to hear from you by end of business today." Robert picked up the card and glanced at it quickly. "I'll do what I can," he said in a tone that suggested he probably would not. Amara turned and walked out of the office, past Sharon, who was staring at her with barely concealed hostility. She walked through the lobby, her head high, even though inside she felt like screaming. As she pushed through the glass door and stepped out into the bright sunshine, she pulled out her phone again. She had a call to make. There was someone who could help her with this, someone who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. Her old friend from college, Victoria Hayes, had become a civil rights attorney. They had stayed in touch over the years, meeting for coffee every few months. Amara found Victoria's number and pressed call. It rang 3 times before Victoria's voice came through, warm and professional.
"Hey, Amara, what's up?"
"Victoria, I need your help," Amara said, her voice finally shaking with the emotion she had been holding back. "I need your help as my attorney. Something just happened at my bank and I think I was discriminated against." There was a pause, then Victoria's voice came back, sharper now, focused. "Tell me everything. Don't leave out any details." Amara stood on the sidewalk outside Metropolitan Trust Bank and told her friend everything that had happened. 2 days had passed since Amara's terrible experience at Metropolitan Trust Bank. She had spent those 2 days writing down every single detail she could remember and sending it all to Victoria. She had also checked her business account obsessively, and the $3,000 was still missing. The bank had not called her, even though Robert Chen had said he would look into it. Victoria had been busy during those 2 days as well. She had done something that Amara did not know was possible. She had filed an emergency motion to obtain the bank's security camera footage from that Tuesday morning. Because Amara had documented everything so carefully, including the exact times and locations, a judge had agreed that there was enough evidence of potential discrimination to warrant preserving the evidence. Now it was Thursday morning, and Amara was getting ready to go back to the bank. But this time, she would not be alone. Victoria was meeting her there at 10 o'clock. Amara chose her outfit carefully. She wore a charcoal gray suit with a pale pink blouse, pearl earrings, and black heels. She wanted to look professional and put together. She wanted them to see exactly who they had dismissed. Victoria had told her to dress professionally too. "We're going to show them that you're a successful businesswoman who deserves respect," Victoria had said on the phone. "And we're going to make it very clear that what they did was wrong." Amara arrived at the bank at 9:55. She sat in her car for a few minutes, taking deep breaths. Her heart was beating fast. She was nervous, But she also felt something else. She felt powerful. She was not alone this time. She had someone on her side who knew the law and knew how to fight, too. At exactly 10 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled into the parking lot. Victoria stepped out, and Amara could not help but smile. Victoria looked like she meant business. She wore a perfectly tailored black suit with a crisp white shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a leather briefcase and wore glasses that made her look both intelligent and intimidating. Victoria was 30 years old, 2 years older than Amara. They had met in college when they were both in the business school, though Victoria had later switched to law. Victoria was also a black woman, and she had experienced her own share of discrimination over the years. That was part of why she had chosen to specialize in civil rights law. She wanted to fight for people who were treated unfairly. "Ready?" Victoria asked as Amara got out of her car. "Ready," Amara said, though her voice trembled slightly. Victoria put a hand on her shoulder. "Remember, stay calm and professional no matter what happens. Let me do most of the talking. You're not just my client today. You're the evidence of what they did wrong." They walked across the parking lot together, their heels clicking in rhythm. When they pushed through the glass door of Metropolitan Trust Bank, Amara felt every eye in the lobby turn toward them. There was something about the way Victoria carried herself that commanded attention. The bank was moderately busy again, just like it had been on Tuesday. Amara's eyes immediately went to the teller windows. Her stomach tightened when she saw Sharon standing at the same window on the far right. Sharon was helping a customer, but she glanced over and her eyes widened slightly when she saw Amara. Victoria walked straight to Sharon's window, not waiting for her to finish with her current customer. When the customer left, Victoria stepped forward before anyone else could approach. "Good morning," Victoria said, her voice clear and authoritative. "My name is Victoria Hayes. I'm an attorney at law." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a leather card holder. She flipped it open to show her bar card, the official identification that proved she was a licensed attorney. "I'm here, representing my client, Miss Amara Collins, regarding a serious matter of potential civil rights violations at this branch." Sharon's face went pale. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her eyes darted from Victoria's bar card to Amara's face and back again. "I need to speak with your branch manager immediately," Victoria continued, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I also need to speak with your regional director if they are available. This is a matter of urgent legal importance." Sharon seemed frozen for a moment. Then she swallowed hard and picked up her phone with a shaking hand. Let me call the manager," she stammered. Amara watched the whole thing, trying not to smile. The difference in Sharon's behavior was almost comical. 2 days ago, this same woman had rolled her eyes at Amara and dismissed her concerns. Now she looked like she wanted to disappear. Sharon spoke quickly into the phone, her voice low. Amara could not hear what she was saying, but she could see the panic in Sharon's eyes. Less than a minute later, Robert Chen emerged from his office in the back. He walked quickly toward them, and Amara noticed that his professional smile looked strained. "Good morning," Robert said, extending his hand to Victoria. "I'm Robert Chen, the branch manager. How can I help you?" Victoria shook his hand briefly, then pulled out a business card and handed it to him. "Victoria Hayes, civil rights attorney. I'm here on behalf of my client, Amara Collins." She gestured to Amara, and Robert's eyes flickered with recognition. His smile faded a bit. "Ah, yes, Miss Collins," Robert said, his tone trying to sound friendly, but coming across as nervous. "I apologize, I haven't had a chance to look into your account issue yet. We've been quite busy." "I'm not here about the account issue, Mr. Chen, though that is part of a larger problem," Victoria said crisply. "I'm here to discuss a pattern of discriminatory behavior that my client experienced at this branch on Tuesday morning. I've reviewed the documentation she provided, and I've obtained the security camera footage from that morning through a court order." Robert's face changed. The color drained from his cheeks. "Security footage? I don't understand. Perhaps we should discuss this in private." "That would be appropriate," Victoria agreed. "Is your regional director available? This matter concerns not just this branch, but potentially the bank's corporate policies." The regional director? Robert looked like he was going to be sick. Actually, yes, Mr. Armstrong happens to be visiting today. He's in the conference room, but I'm not sure this requires his involvement. I assure you it does, Victoria said firmly. Please take us to him now. Robert hesitated, then nodded. Of course, please follow me. As they walked through the bank toward the back offices, Amara could feel everyone watching them. Other tellers, other customers, everyone could sense that something serious was happening. Sharon stood at her window, still looking pale and frightened. Robert led them down a hallway to a large conference room with a long table and leather chairs. Sitting at the head of the table was an older white man in an expensive-looking suit. He had gray hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of face that was used to being in charge. He looked up from his laptop as they entered. Gerald, these ladies need to speak with you, Robert said, his voice uncertain. This is Victoria Hayes, an attorney, and her client, Miss Collins. Gerald Armstrong stood up, his expression curious and a bit wary. He was clearly a man who was used to being in control of situations. Good morning. I'm Gerald Armstrong, Regional Director for Metropolitan Trust. What brings an attorney to our branch today? Victoria did not waste time. She set her briefcase on the table and pulled out a folder. Mr. Armstrong, I'm here to inform you of a serious civil rights violation that occurred at this branch. My client, Amara Collins, was subjected to discriminatory treatment by your employee, Sharon Winters, and your branch manager, Robert Chen, failed to address the situation appropriately. Gerald's eyes narrowed. He glanced at Robert, whose face was now bright red. That's a serious accusation. What exactly are you alleging? I'm not alleging, Mr. Armstrong. I'm stating facts that I can prove, Victoria said. She opened her folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. On Tuesday morning at approximately 10:30, my client entered this branch to report a missing transfer of $3,000. Your teller, Miss Winters, dismissed her concerns without properly investigating. She suggested that my client didn't know how to manage her own money and refused to call a manager. When my client persisted, she was ignored and made to wait in the lobby for 45 minutes. Now wait a minute, Robert started to say. But Victoria held up her hand. I'm not finished, she said sharply. During that 45 minutes, my client observed Miss Winters and other employees providing markedly different service to white customers. When a white male customer came in with an identical issue, a missing deposit, Miss Winters immediately called Mr. Chen. He appeared within minutes and personally resolved the issue. The disparity in treatment was clear and documented. Gerald's face was hard to read now. He looked at Robert. Is this true? Robert shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall the specific situation, but I'm sure there was a misunderstanding. We treat all customers equally here. Then perhaps you'd like to watch the security footage, Victoria said coolly. She pulled out another document. I have a court order here requiring the bank to preserve and provide all security footage from Tuesday morning between 10 and noon. I've already reviewed portions of it. It shows exactly what my client described. Different treatment, different wait times, different levels of service based on race. The room went very quiet. Gerald slowly sat back down in his chair. He looked at Robert, then at Victoria, then at Amara. For the first time, he really looked at Amara, seeming to see her as a real person rather than just a problem to be managed. Miss Collins, Gerald said, his voice more careful now. I apologize if you felt you were treated unfairly. I assure you that we take all complaints seriously. With respect, Mr. Armstrong, Amara said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. I didn't feel treated unfairly. I was treated unfairly. There's a difference. And this isn't just about my feelings being hurt. This is about illegal discrimination. Victoria nodded approvingly. My client is correct. We're talking about violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and potentially other civil rights laws. We're also talking about a pattern of behavior that suggests this isn't an isolated incident. I've already begun reaching out to other customers of color who have banked at this branch, and I'm hearing similar stories. Gerald's expression changed to one of genuine alarm now. Other customers? At least 3 others so far, Victoria confirmed. And I've only just started investigating. So I'm here today to put you on notice that we are considering legal action. We're prepared to file a discrimination complaint with the State Banking Commission and with federal regulators. We're also prepared to file a civil lawsuit if necessary." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Robert looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Gerald's jaw was tight, and Amara could see his mind working, calculating the potential damage. Gerald Armstrong's face had lost some of its confident color. He gestured toward the chairs around the conference table. "Please sit down. Let's discuss this rationally." Victoria and Amara took seats across from Gerald. Robert remained standing near the door, looking like he wanted to escape but did not dare leave. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier with tension. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here," Gerald began, his tone shifting into what Amara recognized as damage control mode. "Metropolitan Trust Bank has strict policies against discrimination of any kind. We serve all customers equally. If there was a service issue, I'm certain we can resolve it quickly." "This isn't a service issue, Mr. Armstrong," Victoria said, pulling out her laptop from her briefcase. "This is a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and I have evidence to prove it." She opened her laptop and turned it so Gerald could see the screen. "The bank was required to provide me with the security footage. I've spent the last 2 days reviewing it carefully, frame by frame. Let me show you what I found." Amara watched as Victoria pulled up a video file. The image showed the interior of the bank from Tuesday morning, taken from a camera mounted high on the wall near the entrance. The angle captured most of the lobby and 3 of the 4 teller windows, including Sharon's. "This is Tuesday at 10:32 in the morning," Victoria narrated, pointing at the screen. "Here you can see my client approaching Miss Winter's window." On the screen, Amara watched herself walk up to the counter. Even in the grainy footage, you could see Sharon barely glancing up. Victoria let the footage play for a few moments. "The audio is not clear, but we can see the body language. Notice how Miss Winters makes minimal eye contact. The interaction lasts exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds before my client walks away to sit in the lobby." Gerald leaned forward, watching carefully. His expression was unreadable. "Now let me show you something else," Victoria said, fast-forwarding the footage. "This is 42 minutes later at 11:14. Here comes another customer with a missing deposit issue." She pointed at the screen, where the middle-aged white man in the business suit approached Sharon's window. They watched as Sharon immediately picked up the phone. Within seconds, Robert appeared on the screen, walking quickly from his office. The whole interaction was animated, with both Sharon and Robert clearly engaged and concerned. "This interaction lasted 11 minutes, Victoria said, and the problem was resolved immediately. Mr. Chen personally made the adjustment to the account right there at the window." She paused the video and looked directly at Gerald. "Same type of problem, identical issue, but completely different treatment. The only variable that changed was the race of the customer." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Robert's face had gone from red to pale. He looked like he might be sick. That's not necessarily about race," Robert stammered. "Different situations require different approaches. Maybe the first issue was more complicated." "Was it?" Victoria asked, turning to look at him. "Because according to the notes you made in the bank system, which I also subpoenaed, both issues were coding errors in the transfer system. Nearly identical technical problems. So why did one customer wait 45 minutes with no resolution, while the other waited 2 minutes and got immediate service from the branch manager himself?" Robert opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Gerald desperately, but Gerald was staring at the laptop screen with a grim expression. Victoria was not done. She pulled up another video clip. "Let me show you more. This is 30 minutes of footage showing Miss Winters interacting with 8 different customers that morning. Let's watch together, shall we?" She played the clips in sequence. The pattern was undeniable. With white customers, Sharon was warm, friendly, taking her time. She smiled, made small talk, and patiently answered questions. With the 3 customers of color who came to her window, her demeanor changed completely. She was curt, impatient, and dismissive. The differences were stark and impossible to ignore. "But it's not just Miss Winters," Victoria continued, pulling up more documentation. "I've also documented wait times. On average, customers of color waited 7 minutes longer than white customers for service that morning. When they did receive service, their interactions were 30% shorter on average, even for similar transactions." She spread several printed charts and graphs on the table. "This is statistical analysis. The disparities are significant enough that they cannot be explained by chance or by complexity of transactions. This is a pattern, Mr. Armstrong. A clear, measurable pattern of racial discrimination. Gerald was now leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he spoke. Miss Collins, Miss Hayes, I want you to know that if what you're showing me is accurate, this is absolutely not acceptable. This is not what Metropolitan Trust stands for. With respect, sir, Amara said, her voice steady but firm, what your bank stands for is shown by what your bank does, and what your employees did was discriminate against me because of my skin color. And from what Victoria has found, I'm not the only one. Victoria nodded. That's correct. As I mentioned, I've made contact with 3 other customers of color who have banked at this branch. I spoke with them yesterday. They've all experienced similar treatment. One woman, an African-American woman in her 50s who has banked here for 12 years, told me she stopped coming to this branch because she always felt unwelcome. She now drives an extra 20 minutes to a different branch. Another customer, a Hispanic man who owns a construction business, told me that he had loan applications delayed multiple times with no clear explanation, while his white business partner at a different branch got approval in days for the same type of loan. Victoria continued, consulting her notes. And a third customer, a young black man, told me he was followed by a security guard every time he came into this branch, as if he was suspected of planning to rob the place. He was a medical student just trying to deposit his student loan money. Gerald's face was getting more and more tense with each story. He looked at Robert. Did you know about any of this? Robert shook his head quickly. No, sir. I've heard a few complaints over the years, but nothing that seemed serious. Just normal customer service issues, you know how it is. Some people are never satisfied. Normal customer service issues, Victoria repeated, her voice sharp. Mr. Chen, discrimination is not a customer service issue. It's a civil rights violation. And the fact that you dismiss these complaints as people being never satisfied is part of the problem. You failed to investigate, you failed to take action, and you allowed this behavior to continue. Robert looked like he was about to defend himself, but Gerald held up a hand to stop him. Victoria, may I call you Victoria? You may, Mr. Armstrong. Victoria, I need to be honest with you. What you've shown me is deeply concerning, but I need to understand your intentions here. Are you planning to file a lawsuit? Are you going to go public with this? Victoria looked at Amara, a silent question passing between them. They had discussed this possibility. Going public could be powerful, but it could also be exhausting and painful for Amara. A lawsuit could take years and consume their lives. But sometimes, the threat of these things was enough to force real change. Our intentions depend on what actions the bank is willing to take, Victoria said carefully. My client has been harmed. Other customers have been harmed. The question is, whether Metropolitan Trust is willing to acknowledge that harm and make meaningful changes to prevent it from happening again. What kind of changes are you talking about? Gerald asked. Patricia pulled up Victoria's background on her laptop. She's a civil rights attorney, graduated top of her class from Howard University Law School. She's handled about 30 discrimination cases in the past 5 years, and she's won or settled favorably on 27 of them. She's got a reputation for being thorough and aggressive. She doesn't just go after individual damages. She pushes for systemic change. Smart, Thomas commented. She knows that real change is more valuable than any settlement check. What's our exposure here? Margaret asked. Patricia took a deep breath. Legally? Significant. We're looking at potential violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Fair Housing Act as it relates to banking services, and various state anti-discrimination laws. The evidence is strong. If this goes to trial, we would likely lose. Financially, we're looking at damages to Miss Collins and potentially to other affected customers. But the bigger risk is the reputational damage and the regulatory scrutiny. If federal regulators decide to do a full audit of our branches based on this, they could find problems elsewhere too. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed this information. There's something else you should know, Patricia added. Victoria Hayes put out inquiries to other customers of the branch. She's already found 3 others willing to talk. But I did some checking, and there are probably more. If this becomes a class action lawsuit, we could be facing dozens or even hundreds of plaintiffs. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with determination. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, Sharon Winters is terminated immediately. Not suspended, terminated. I want her out today. Thomas nodded. I'll handle the paperwork. Second, Margaret continued, Robert Chen is removed as branch manager. I don't want him terminated necessarily, not yet, but he failed in his duty as a manager. He allowed this to happen. He's demoted and required to go through extensive management training, focused on discrimination prevention. If he doesn't complete it successfully or if any other issues arise, then he's terminated too. Third, she said, her voice getting stronger, I want a comprehensive review of customer service practices at every single one of our branches. I want to know if this problem exists elsewhere. And I want solutions, real solutions, not just more training that people ignore. She turned to Patricia. And fourth, we're going to settle with Miss Collins and her attorney. We're going to give them what they want within reason. I don't want this going to court. I don't want this in the news. But more importantly, we're going to fix the actual problem, because that's the right thing to do. Patricia nodded. I'll reach out to Victoria Hayes and set up a meeting to discuss settlement terms. Over the next few days, the pieces fell into place. Sharon Winters was called into a meeting with Human Resources and informed that her employment was terminated effective immediately. She tried to argue, claiming she had done nothing wrong, but the evidence was presented to her. She was given a severance package on the condition that she sign a non-disparagement agreement. She left the building in tears, but few people felt sympathy for her. Robert Chen was called into a similar meeting. He was told he was being demoted to a junior manager position at a different branch, one that came with a significant pay cut. He was also required to complete a 3-month management training program, focused on preventing discrimination and properly handling complaints. He accepted the terms, knowing he was lucky to still have a job at all. But the real work was just beginning. Margaret Reynolds had meant what she said about systemic change. She put together a task force to completely overhaul how the bank handled discrimination and customer service issues. The task force consisted of people from across the organization, HR professionals, legal experts, branch employees, and critically, outside consultants who specialized in diversity and inclusion. They were given 6 weeks to come up with a comprehensive plan. They worked around the clock, reviewing policies, conducting focus groups with employees, and analyzing data from every branch. What they found was that while the situation at the branch where Amara had been treated so poorly was the worst, there were problems at other locations too. Nothing as severe, but enough to show that this was not just a one-branch problem. The task force made dozens of recommendations. Some were simple, like requiring managers to personally respond to every discrimination complaint within 24 hours. Others were more complex, like implementing an independent review board made up of community members to evaluate complaints. One recommendation that everyone agreed on was the need for regular audits. The bank would now track customer service metrics by race and ethnicity, not to profile customers, but to identify disparities in treatment. If any branch showed statistical differences in service times or customer satisfaction, it would trigger an immediate investigation. Another key recommendation was training, but not the usual boring online modules that employees clicked through without paying attention. This would be in-person training, facilitated by experts, with role-playing exercises and real discussions about bias, both conscious and unconscious. The plan also included something that had never been done before at Metropolitan Trust. The bank would create a community advisory board in neighborhoods with large minority populations. These boards would meet quarterly with bank executives to provide feedback on services and raise concerns. It was a way to give communities a voice and to hold the bank accountable. As all of this was happening behind the scenes, Victoria Hayes was preparing her client for what might come next. She and Amara met several times to discuss strategy and to talk through what Amara wanted out of this situation. 3 weeks after their confrontation in the conference room, Victoria received a call from Patricia Morrison requesting a formal meeting to discuss settlement. They scheduled it for the following Thursday at Victoria's law office. Victoria's office was in a modern building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. She had built her practice from the ground up, starting with a tiny shared office space and gradually growing as she won case after case. Now she had a small suite with a reception area, her own office, and a conference room for client meetings. Amara arrived 15 minutes early. She was nervous, though she tried not to show it. Victoria had explained that this meeting could go many different ways. The bank might offer a small amount of money and hope they would go away. Or they might take the situation seriously and offer real solutions. There was no way to know until they sat down at the table. "Remember," Victoria said as they waited in the conference room, "we're not just negotiating for money. Money is important, yes, and you deserve compensation for what you went through. But the real goal is to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Keep that in mind as we talk." At exactly 10 o'clock, the receptionist buzzed to let them know that Patricia Morrison had arrived. But she had not come alone. With her were two other people, a younger man who introduced himself as the bank's director of human resources, Michael Chen, and an older woman who was the senior vice president of operations, Linda Washington. Linda Washington was a black woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and an air of authority. She was the highest-ranking person in the room from the bank's side, and her presence sent a message. The bank was taking this seriously. "Thank you for meeting with us," Patricia began once everyone was seated. "I want to start by saying on behalf of Metropolitan Trust Bank, we are deeply sorry for what happened to Miss Collins. What she experienced was unacceptable and does not represent our values as an institution." Victoria nodded but said nothing, waiting to hear what would come next. Patricia continued, "Over the past 3 weeks, we have conducted an extensive internal investigation. What we found was disturbing. The behavior that Miss Collins experienced was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that had been allowed to continue due to management failures. We take full responsibility for those failures." She slid a folder across the table to Victoria. "This contains a detailed report of our investigation findings. I want you to have full transparency about what we discovered." Victoria opened the folder and began reading while Patricia explained. The report was thorough, documenting the 15 previous complaints, the statistical analysis of service times, the findings about Sharon Winters and Robert Chen. It was more than Victoria had expected. Most companies tried to hide this kind of information, but Patricia was laying it all out on the table. "As you'll see in the report, we have already taken action," Patricia said. "Sharon Winters has been terminated. Robert Chen has been demoted and is undergoing mandatory retraining. But we know that's not enough." Linda Washington spoke up now, her voice warm but serious. "Miss Collins, I want you to know that what happened to you matters. As a black woman who has worked in banking for 30 years, I have experienced my own share of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated as less than, and I'm ashamed that it happened in one of our branches." Amara felt a lump in her throat. This was unexpected. She had prepared herself for corporate lawyers making excuses and trying to minimize what happened. She had not prepared for genuine emotion and acknowledgement. "We want to do more than just apologize," Linda continued. "We want to make real changes, and we want to offer Miss Collins a settlement that reflects both the harm she suffered and our commitment to doing better." Patricia pulled out another document. "We are prepared to offer Miss Collins $150,000 in damages. This includes compensation for the distress she experienced, for her time dealing with this matter, and for the violation of her civil rights. We will also provide a formal written apology from our CEO that will be placed in Miss Collins' file and can be shared if she chooses." Victoria glanced at Amara, who was sitting very still, processing this information. $150,000 was a significant amount. It was more than Victoria had initially expected them to offer. "In addition," Patricia continued, "we are implementing a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program for all employees at all branches. This will be mandatory, in-person training conducted by outside experts. No online modules that people click through. Real training with real accountability." Michael Chen, the HR director, spoke for the first time. "We're also creating a new system for handling discrimination complaints. Any complaint will be reviewed by a team that includes HR, legal, and an outside diversity consultant. No single manager will have the power to dismiss these complaints anymore, and there will be quarterly audits of customer service metrics broken down by demographics to identify any disparities." Victoria was taking notes, but her expression remained neutral. This was all good, but she had learned not to seem too impressed too quickly. "What about oversight?" she asked. "How do we know these changes will actually be implemented and maintained?" Linda answered this question. "We're creating an independent customer advisory board. It will be made up of community members, including representatives from minority communities. They'll meet quarterly with senior bank leadership to review policies and raise concerns, and they'll have the power to request information and investigation if they see patterns of discrimination. We're also committing to annual public reports on our diversity and inclusion metrics, Patricia added. We'll publish data on customer satisfaction by demographics, employee diversity at all levels, and discrimination complaints and how they were resolved. Full transparency. Victoria looked at Amara, raising an eyebrow slightly. This was impressive. This was more than she had hoped for when they started down this path. But she could see that Amara was thinking hard about something. Can I speak for a moment? Amara asked quietly. Of course, Victoria said. This is your case. Amara looked at each of the bank representatives in turn. What you're offering is good. It's more than I expected, honestly, and I appreciate that you're taking this seriously, but I have a question. What about the other customers? The ones Victoria found who also experienced discrimination, and the ones who never reported it because they didn't think anyone would listen? Linda nodded slowly. That's a fair question. What did you have in mind? I was thinking about my community, Amara said, her voice growing stronger. I live in a neighborhood where a lot of people don't have good relationships with banks. They don't trust banks because they've been treated poorly, or denied loans, or charged unfair fees. If this bank really wants to show that it's changed, maybe it should do something to help those communities. Victoria smiled. This was exactly the kind of thinking she had hoped Amara would bring to the table. Not just thinking about herself, but about the broader impact. What if, Amara continued, as part of this settlement, the bank agreed to create a fund for financial literacy programs in underserved communities? Programs that teach people about banking, about building credit, about small business loans. Real programs, not just brochures. Programs with real people who look like the communities they're serving. Patricia and Linda exchanged glances. Michael was writing notes quickly. That's an interesting idea, Linda said carefully. How large of a fund were you thinking? Victoria jumped in here, her lawyer instincts taking over. Given the seriousness of the violations we've documented, and the potential liability if this case went to court or became public, I think a fund of at least $1 million would be appropriate. Dedicated specifically to financial education and community outreach in minority communities. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Michael's pen stopped moving. That was a significant ask. That's a substantial amount, Patricia said slowly. And this is a substantial case, Victoria countered. You have documented discrimination spanning 6 years. You have statistical evidence of disparate treatment. You have multiple witnesses. If we file a class action lawsuit, the damages could be much higher. And the publicity would be devastating to the bank's reputation. $1 million for a community investment fund is actually quite reasonable compared to what you're risking. Linda leaned back in her chair, thinking, I need to consult with our executive team about a number that large. But I can tell you that I personally like the idea. It's restorative. It's forward-thinking. It's not just about punishing the bank. It's about building something positive. There's another thing, Amara said, surprising even Victoria. I want to make sure that the people working in these community programs are actually from the communities. Not just white people coming in to help black and brown neighborhoods. People who understand what it's like to be denied, to be dismissed, to be discriminated against. People who've lived it. That's a really important point, Linda agreed. I can commit to that right now. Any community outreach programs we develop will be led by people from those communities. We'll make that part of the program design. Victoria was impressed with how Amara was handling this. She had coached her client on negotiation tactics, but Amara was doing this naturally, speaking from the heart about what mattered to her. Let me be direct, Victoria said, leaning forward. Here's what we're looking for in a comprehensive settlement. First, compensation for Miss Collins. The $150,000 you mentioned is a starting point. But given the severity and duration of the discriminatory pattern you found, I think $275,000 is more appropriate. Patricia started to object, but Victoria held up her hand. Let me finish. Second, all the policy changes you've outlined in writing with specific timelines for implementation. Third, the Community Investment Fund of $1 million dedicated to financial literacy and outreach programs led by community members. Fourth, the Independent Advisory Board with real power to investigate and make recommendations. And fifth, the public transparency reports you mentioned. That's asking for a lot, Patricia said. You have a lot to answer for, Victoria replied calmly. 6 years of documented discrimination, multiple victims, a pattern of management failures. If this goes public, if we file with federal regulators, the damage to Metropolitan Trust will be far greater than what we're asking for. Not just in dollars, but in reputation and customer trust and regulatory scrutiny. Every branch you operate could face audits. Every business practice could be questioned. Is that really worth saving a few $100,000? The room was quiet. Patricia, Linda, and Michael were all looking at each other, having a silent conversation with their eyes. Finally, Linda spoke. I need to make a phone call. Can you give us the room for 15 minutes? Of course, Victoria said. The 3 bank representatives stepped out into the hallway. Through the glass wall of the conference room, Amara and Victoria could see them talking intensely, with Patricia on her phone. You did great, Victoria whispered to Amara. The community fund idea was brilliant. It changes this from just being about you getting paid to being about creating lasting change. I just kept thinking about what you said, Amara replied. That this isn't just about me. If I just take the money and walk away, what changes? Sharon gets fired, but the culture stays the same. The next Sharon Winters comes along, and someone else goes through what I went through. After 20 minutes, not 15, the bank representatives came back in. Patricia looked tired but resolved. Linda looked determined. We've consulted with our CEO, Patricia said. We're authorized to accept your terms with one modification. The settlement amount for Miss Collins will be $275,000 as you requested. The policy changes will be implemented within 6 months, with written reports provided to you quarterly, so you can verify compliance. The Community Investment Fund will be $2 million, not $1 million. Amara gasped slightly. Victoria's eyebrows shot up, Linda explained. Our CEO, Margaret Reynolds, felt strongly that if we're going to do this, we should do it right. $1 million felt like the minimum. $2 million allows us to really make an impact, to create programs in multiple communities to sustain them for years. We're also going to hire a chief diversity officer, whose job will be specifically to oversee these initiatives and ensure we're living up to our commitments. Victoria looked at Amara, who had tears in her eyes now. Not tears of sadness, but of something else. Relief maybe, or pride, or hope. Do we have a deal? Patricia asked. 2 months had passed since that meeting in Victoria's conference room. 2 months of lawyers drawing up settlement agreements, of the bank's executives putting together implementation plans, of Victoria carefully reviewing every word of every document to make sure the promises would be kept. Today was the day the settlement became final. Amara sat in Victoria's office signing the last page of the settlement agreement. Her hand was steady as she wrote her signature, but her mind was filled with all the emotions of the past few months. Anger at what had happened, pride at how she had stood up for herself, hope for what the settlement would create. It's done, Victoria said, witnessing Amara's signature and adding her own. $275,000 will be deposited into your account within 5 business days. And Metropolitan Trust Bank is now legally bound to implement every change we negotiated. Amara let out a long breath she did not know she had been holding. I still can't believe we did this. You did this, Victoria corrected her. I just helped you use the law. But you're the one who had the courage to fight back, to not just accept being treated poorly. A lot of people would have just closed their account and gone to a different bank. You chose to make it mean something. The terms of the settlement were comprehensive. Sharon Winters was gone, officially terminated for cause. Robert Chen had completed his mandatory training and was now working as an assistant manager at a branch in a different part of the city, with his performance being closely monitored. If he received even one more complaint about discrimination, he would be terminated immediately. But the real changes went far beyond just 2 employees. Metropolitan Trust had hired Dr. James Patterson as their new chief diversity officer. Dr. Patterson was a well-respected expert in organizational psychology and diversity initiatives, a black man in his late 40s who had turned around several major corporations with similar problems. His salary was substantial, and he had been given real power, reporting directly to the CEO with authority to investigate any branch, review any complaint, and mandate changes. One of Dr. Patterson's first acts was to implement the new discrimination complaint system. Now any customer who felt they had been discriminated against could file a complaint through multiple channels, in person at any branch, by phone through a dedicated hotline, or online through a secure form. Every complaint went directly to a review team that included Dr. Patterson, someone from HR, someone from legal, and an outside consultant from a civil rights organization. The complaints could no longer be dismissed by a single manager. They could no longer be swept under the rug. Every single one had to be investigated within 48 hours, with a written report documenting the findings and any actions taken. The mandatory training had also begun. Every employee at every branch, from tellers to managers to back office staff, was required to attend an 8-hour in-person training session on preventing discrimination and recognizing unconscious bias. The training was not lecture-based. It involved role-playing, small group discussions, and real scenarios that employees might face. And it was not a one-time thing. There would be refresher training every year. The customer service audits were now happening quarterly. The bank had hired a data analytics firm to review service times, customer satisfaction surveys, and transaction patterns across all branches. The data was broken down by customer demographics to identify any disparities. If a branch showed patterns of longer wait times or lower satisfaction scores for minority customers, it triggered an immediate investigation. The Independent Customer Advisory Board had been formed with great care. It consisted of 15 members representing different communities across the city: Black community leaders, Latino business owners, Asian American advocacy groups, and representatives from LGBTQ organizations. They met quarterly with senior bank executives, including the CEO, to review policies and provide feedback. And they had real power. If they identified a problem, the bank was required to respond in writing within 30 days with an action plan. But perhaps the most visible change was the Community Investment Fund. $2 million dedicated to financial literacy and community outreach. Dr. Patterson had worked with community organizations to design programs that would actually meet people's needs. In Amara's own neighborhood, a community center that had been struggling to stay open received a grant to create a financial literacy program. The program offered free classes on topics like building credit, understanding loans, starting a small business, and avoiding predatory lending. The classes were taught by people from the neighborhood who had gone through training to become certified financial educators. In another neighborhood across town, the bank partnered with a Latino community organization to provide bilingual financial counseling services. Many people in that community had been afraid to go to banks because of language barriers and fear of discrimination. Now they had a place where they could get help in Spanish from people who understood their culture. In a predominantly Asian neighborhood, the bank worked with local community leaders to provide workshops specifically focused on helping immigrant families navigate the American banking system, which was often very different from banking in their home countries. The programs were not just about teaching people how to use banks. They were about building trust, about showing communities that had been underserved or mistreated that banks could actually be partners in building wealth and security. 6 months after the settlement was finalized, Metropolitan Trust held a public event to open the first community financial literacy center, funded by the investment. It was in the same neighborhood where Amara lived. The center was in a renovated storefront with big windows and comfortable seating. It had classrooms for workshops, individual counseling rooms, and computers where people could access banking services with help if they needed it. Amara was invited to attend the opening ceremony. She had not been planning to go, not wanting to draw attention to herself, but Victoria convinced her. "This exists because of you," Victoria had said, "because you refuse to accept discrimination. The people in this community deserve to know that someone fought for them." So Amara went, wearing a blue dress and feeling nervous. The center was packed with people from the neighborhood, community leaders, bank executives, and local media. There were speeches from the bank's CEO, Margaret Reynolds, from Dr. Patterson, and from several community organizers. Then Dr. Patterson did something unexpected. He invited Amara to the front of the room. "I want to introduce you to someone," he said to the crowd. "Many of you don't know her, but this center, these programs, they exist because of her courage. This is Amara Collins, and she's the reason we're all here today." Amara felt her face get hot as everyone turned to look at her. Dr. Patterson gestured for her to come up and stand beside him. "Miss Collins experienced discrimination at one of our branches," Dr. Patterson continued. She could have just walked away angry. She could have just taken her business elsewhere and said nothing. But she didn't. She stood up. She demanded accountability, and because she refused to accept being treated as less than, all of these changes happened. This center exists. These programs exist, and thousands of people will benefit from her courage. The room erupted in applause. Amara stood there, tears streaming down her face as people cheered. She saw faces in the crowd, old neighbors, people from her church, the woman who ran the corner store, all of them looking at her with pride and gratitude. When the applause finally died down, Dr. Patterson handed her the microphone. She had not prepared anything to say, but words came to her anyway. "I didn't do this alone," she said, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger. "I had a brilliant attorney, Victoria Hayes, who knew how to use the law to create change. I had friends and family who supported me. And I had all of you, even though I didn't know it at the time. Because when I was sitting in that bank, being ignored and dismissed, I kept thinking about everyone who has ever felt invisible because of the color of their skin. Everyone who has ever been treated as less than. And I thought, this has to stop. Somebody has to say enough." She paused, looking around the room. "What happened to me was wrong. But what we created from that wrong is beautiful. This center, these programs, they're going to help people build better lives. They're going to give people tools and knowledge. And most importantly, they're going to show people that they matter, that they deserve respect, that they deserve dignity. That's what this is really about. Not money, not revenge, but dignity." More applause, and Amara handed the microphone back, her hands trembling. As she stepped down, Victoria was there waiting for her with a huge smile. "That was perfect," Victoria whispered, hugging her. After the ceremony, people came up to Amara in waves. An elderly black woman with gray hair grabbed both of Amara's hands in hers. "Thank you, baby," the woman said. "I've been banking for 50 years, and I can't tell you how many times I've been treated like I didn't matter. Like my money wasn't as good as someone else's. Thank you for fighting." A young Latino man, maybe 20 years old, shook her hand. "My mom was afraid of banks her whole life because someone treated her badly once. Now she's taking classes here. She's learning. She's not afraid anymore. Thank you." Story after story, person after person, each one telling Amara that what she did mattered. Each one showing her that this was bigger than just her experience. But the changes were not just happening in the community, they were happening inside the bank too. Employees were being held accountable. Several other employees at other branches, who had been accused of discrimination, were investigated and either retrained or terminated. Managers who had dismissed complaints were being monitored closely. The bank's statistics started to shift. Customer satisfaction scores among minority customers began to rise. Complaints about discrimination dropped by 60% in the first year. Service time disparities between white customers and customers of color were almost eliminated. It was not perfect. There were still problems, still individual incidents of bias or discrimination. But now there were systems in place to catch those problems and address them. There was accountability. There was oversight. There was genuine commitment from leadership to do better. A year after the settlement, Victoria received a call from another attorney who specialized in civil rights cases. The attorney told her that 3 other major banks in the region were now implementing similar programs and policies, not because they had been sued, but because they saw what Metropolitan Trust was doing and realized they needed to get ahead of potential problems. "You set a new standard," the attorney told Victoria. "Other banks are looking at the Metropolitan Trust case as a blueprint for how to handle these issues. You changed the game." Victoria shared this news with Amara over coffee at their favorite cafe. Amara smiled, but it was a thoughtful smile. "I've been thinking a lot about how this all happened," Amara said, stirring her coffee slowly. "About how it started with me just trying to resolve a simple problem with my account. How it could have ended so differently if I had just given up after that first visit." "But you didn't give up," Victoria said. "That's the point." "I almost did," Amara admitted. "When I was sitting in my car that day after Robert Chen dismissed me, I almost just drove away and never went back. I was tired. I was hurt. I didn't want to fight. But then I thought about all the people who don't have the resources to fight, who don't have a lawyer friend, who don't have the time or energy or knowledge to push back, and I realized that if I didn't fight, who would? Victoria reached across the table and squeezed Amara's hand. You know what makes you special? It's not that you're braver than anyone else. It's that you saw beyond your own experience. You understood that this was about more than just you. That's what created real change. Amara's business had grown significantly over the past year. The publicity from the case had brought her new clients who wanted to work with someone who stood for something. She had been able to hire 2 employees and move into a nicer office. The settlement money had given her financial security, allowing her to take on projects she believed in, even if they were not the most profitable. But more than the business success, more than the money, what mattered to Amara was the impact. Every time she drove past the Community Financial Literacy Center and saw people going in for classes, she felt proud. Every time she heard about someone in her neighborhood getting their first business loan or buying their first house because they learned how to build credit, she felt like it was all worth it. She had turned her pain into purpose. She had transformed discrimination into dignity for thousands of people. 2 years after that terrible Tuesday morning when Sharon Winters had rolled her eyes at her, Amara was invited to speak at a conference on civil rights and banking. She stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people, bankers and community leaders and activists, and she told her story. She talked about the anger and hurt of being dismissed. She talked about the fear of fighting back. She talked about the importance of not accepting discrimination as just the way things are. And she talked about how individual courage, combined with good legal advocacy and institutional willingness to change, could create ripples that spread far beyond one person's experience. Change is possible, she concluded her speech, but it requires all of us to stand up when we see injustice. It requires institutions to be willing to look honestly at their failures and commit to doing better. And it requires laws that protect people from discrimination and lawyers who know how to use those laws to create accountability. None of us can do it alone. But together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin. That's the world I'm fighting for, and I hope you'll join me in that fight. The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. As Amara left the stage, she saw Victoria in the front row, tears in her eyes, clapping harder than anyone. Later that evening, Amara sat alone in her apartment, looking at the settlement agreement that she kept framed on her wall. Not because of the money, though, that had changed her life, but because it represented something bigger. It represented the moment she decided that her dignity was worth fighting for, and in fighting for her own dignity, she had helped protect the dignity of countless others. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the director of the Community Financial Literacy Center. The message included a photo of a young black girl, maybe 10 years old, participating in a youth financial literacy program. The girl was smiling, holding a certificate showing she had completed a course on saving and budgeting. The message read, "This is what your courage created. Thank you for showing this little girl that she matters, that she deserves respect, and that she can fight for justice. You changed her world." Amara looked at the photo for a long time, at that little girl's proud smile. And she thought about how the world was changing, slowly but surely, one act of courage at a time. Justice was not always fast. It was not always easy. But when people refused to accept injustice, when they stood up and demanded better, justice could be served, and it had been.